Hello, class. Today we're going to talk about Bethenny Frankel at length. Why? That's a really good question. If you can't already tell, I get most of my ideas for videos right when I'm about to fall asleep, when the sleep paralysis demons are hitting. I had this insane idea a few months back to read every single book a Real Housewife has written. Then I Googled it the next day and found out that was over 60 books, which, maybe. But give me time. The next day, I have an awkward amount of time in between doctor's appointments, so I'm working at the library. And I don't know why, I just felt compelled to check out 4 Bethenny Frankel books because that was all they had at that library. I will say, despite what you would assume from this video topic where I chose to read all of Bethenny Frankel's books, I'm actually not really a Bethenny Frankel historian. I've watched the first 3 seasons of Real Housewives of New York. I get it. I get the appeal. She is reality television gold, whether you have a positive or negative opinion about her.
Mention it all. Mention it all, because you know what?
I do feel like if both of us had a Cosmopolitan in our hands, she would eat me alive.
Ramona has to take a little bit more responsibility for her actions. I mean, diarrhea of the mouth is it's not a real ailment.
And I would welcome it, quite honestly. But because Bethenny is inarguably on sort of the Mount Rushmore of Real Housewives, sort of up there with Lisa Vanderpump, Nene Leakes, as someone who is chronically online, I have always had some vague awareness of what she's up to. And that's especially because she herself is probably more chronically online than even me. Bethenny Frankel posts on average, I think 15 to 20 TikToks a day. And that's on top of her podcasts, her appearances. The woman is booked and busy. I would say Bethenny Frankel is revered in the chicken salad review community.
Trader Joe's chicken salad. There is no way.
A new chicken salad has entered the chat.
This chicken salad is so bad, I have to tell you about it.
It's official. Round Swamp Farm has the best chicken salad in the Hamptons.
She got really into drones. You know how there was that speculation about the drones over New Jersey and no one really knew what they were about? Bethenny Frankel got deep into investigating what exactly these drones are, except she was very afraid of being shadow banned by TikTok, so she referred to them as the Dior bags.
Remember when I said the Dior bags are real? I'm officially a little freaked out. Do you remember when I stood on my porch and I talked to you about the Dior bags?
Okay, Dior bag people, I just watched a congressional hearing.
Let's get deep on these Dior bags.
Major Dior bag alert, New Year's Eve, Miami.
And it took me an embarrassing amount of time to realize that she was talking about the drones when she was talking about the Dior bags. It's funny, I can't actually say what she necessarily believed about the Dior bags. I just know that she commented on how there was a suspicious amount of fog. I also remember it somehow being connected to the deadly airplane crash at Reagan earlier this year. It was a lot. I had to log out. Like she was on The Real Housewives, she is not afraid to give an opinion, even if it is at times wildly uninformed or just kind of a bad take. I'm sorry, Bethenny. If you're not familiar with Bethenny at all, here's my best explanation. She is both in personality and honestly kind of in their origin story, as if Lorelai Gilmore was a real person. And I mean that in every positive and negative sense of that connotation. We'll get into more of the specifics of her origin story as we read through some of her books, but suffice to say, she grew up in a very elite circle, went to private schools her entire life, graduated from NYU, but she did not have present parents and at times had very abusive parents. From there, she lived a really chaotic life. She tried to make it as an actor. She was an event planner. She was an assistant to Kathy Hilton, Paris Hilton's babysitter. She started her own vegan baking company in New York. She came in second on The Apprentice with Martha Stewart. She was, of course, on the first season of Real Housewives of New York and sort of built her Skinny Girl empire from there. I, for one, have vivid memories of the Skinny Girl packaging lining the 2000s grocery stores, just thriving in the cesspool that was early 2000s diet culture that did untoward psychological damage towards myself and many people across that time. Since that time, she has inarguably been one of the most prolific entrepreneurs of the Real Housewives franchise. She had a talk show. She was famously on not Dancing with the Stars, Skating with the Stars. And of course, she wrote 9 different books in various categories, ranging from business and dating advice to children's picture books and a cookbook. Oh, she's a natural food chef. I should have mentioned that as well. The world of celebrity books can really range in quality, usually from bad to terrible. Oftentimes, these books aren't even written by the people they're proclaiming to be written by. I will give Bethenny, she had a co-writer for all these books. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like I'm giving her any credit. She had a co-writer, which I actually don't mind. I think that's fine. But it unabashedly is Bethenny Frankel's voice. And I just want to take you on the journey I went through because it's just not fair for Bethenny and I to be the only two skinny girls in the world. For this video, and also just in my personal life, I've been reading a lot of books that are out of print. And so I've been using a lot of different ebook and audiobook sites to try and figure out which one I like. I've signed up for a lot of free trials. I simply don't need all of them. And that is where today's sponsor, Rocket Money, comes in handy. They are the all-in-one personal finance app that helps you lower your bills, cancel subscriptions, and manage your money better. With Rocket Money, once you connect your bank account, Rocket Money can accumulate all of your subscriptions into a single list. And from there, you can select the ones you don't want anymore, and Rocket Money can help you cancel those unwanted subscriptions with just a few taps. Rocket Money is also great for customizing and maintaining a budget. Right from the app, it shows you where your money is going to at all times and can identify top spending categories with insights as to how to manage your budget better. Rocket Money has helped their users save up to $740 a year when using all of their premium features. They've also helped customers save over $880 million in canceled subscriptions. To save more and spend less, join the over 10 million users using Rocket Money today. All you gotta do is click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to get started for free. Naturally thin, unleash your skinny girl and free yourself from a lifetime of dieting. What better way to start a listicle off than with a content warning? If you currently do not feel like you're in a great space with your body or with food, please skip to the next chapter and hear all the other things I have to say about Bethenny Frankel. She very clearly states that this book is not for someone who's struggling with an eating disorder. If that is not enough to convince you, I had my own very lengthy struggles with an eating disorder myself throughout college, got medicated, went to therapy, worked on myself. And so I found this book very funny, but I'm telling you, and I'm not putting this on Bethenny Frankel, but if I had been reading this in college, it wouldn't have been good. Okay? Take care of yourself. Now, with that all being said, who's ready to get naturally thin? I know I am. Almost all of Bethenny Frankel's books fall into the category of self-help, and let me just start by giving my opinion on that genre as a whole. I hate it. No, okay, it's more nuanced than that. Particularly when it comes to diets, health, weight loss, it can be really hard, especially in America, to access experts on those topics. It can be very easy to just be like, ask your doctor, don't take advice from someone from the internet. But that isn't affordable to everybody. I think the one greatest failing of the scientific institution as a whole is that it hasn't been able to connect with the everyday person so that they can make their important research digestible and the public can consume it in the way it's meant to be consumed and not in the way it's often spit out and regurgitated in self-help books such as these. These are complicated, nuanced topics that have decades of research dedicated to them. And particularly in the area of diet, it is incredibly hard to do research on. Oftentimes, researchers are relying on self-reports of what people eat, what their lifestyles are. Oftentimes, that research has been predominantly focused on white men rather than other communities who have different health correlations related to things like weight. But even more than that, when we talk about health as it relates to our diet specifically, it is so closely tied to aesthetic aspirations of our society, of the times that we live in. That's not really a thing that you can just step out of. As Bethenny acknowledges in the book, diet culture and the desire for weight loss is so ubiquitous with our culture, particularly with women. And it is very simple to say weight loss is just about calories in, calories out, eating X amount of thing at a certain time and blah, 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 blah. But the issue is, and the research bears this out, that any form of intentional weight loss through dieting, whether that be through calorie restriction, macro counting, in 10 to 15 years, most people will gain that weight back and even more. The only methods that appear to have consistent results is bariatric surgery and quite possibly Ozempic, although that is a much newer part of the weight loss industry. And as it seems now, once people stop taking Ozempic, they often also gain weight back. You should try to eat fruits and vegetables, have a balanced diet, move your body, do things that make you feel good. But I fundamentally take issue with the premise that those who are naturally thin are inherently healthier and eating in a certain way that other people are not. I can tell you that when I was at my lowest weight, I was at my absolute sickest with chronic illnesses. When I tell you the moment I stopped caring about any of that, and just generally try to be my best, when I stopped caring about how thin I was and all of these rules about how I had to like min-max my own life, I felt better. I felt better mentally, physically. I don't have the answers. I don't really feel like it's my place to tell other people how to eat. When I was filming, I kind of assumed that this went without saying, but honestly, that's probably not something I should assume. But just so you know, I am not by any means trying to skinny shame, naturally thin shame Bethenny Frankel or anybody else who wants to lose weight or has had success losing weight. That aspect is truly none of my business, and I hope it becomes clear as we sort of go through my review of Naturally Thin that my qualms with the book aren't necessarily with her trying to instill healthy habits in her readers. It is the proximity to an aesthetic, that aesthetic being thinness, which also has its own roots in things like white supremacy and the patriarchy, makes a lot of the techniques in this book come off as insincere. Plus, I also think that some of the advice in the book comes off, a little bit dangerous. And at the end of the day, just shouldn't be a substitute for listening to people who have expertise in this very sensitive area of health. Okay. One thing you'll quickly realize about Bethenny is that she loves a very long intro paragraph full of rhetorical questions that go on for far too long. Like, you get the point. She goes, I look fat.
I hate my body. My thighs are huge. Why did I just eat that? I can't believe I just ate that. I can't lose weight. I have a slow metabolism. I can't eat that. I really want to eat that, but I shouldn't. I hate myself. I picked out. I'm definitely going on a diet tomorrow. I can't stay on a diet. I'm hopeless. I have no willpower. I'm pathetic. What is wrong with me? She can eat anything she wants. I hate her. I was so good today. I skipped dinner. I can't wait to weigh myself tomorrow and see how much weight I lost. Tomorrow I'm not eating anything. I'm never eating again. I'm not going to that party. I'll just eat too much. Why did I eat so much? I want to do over. I feel so guilty. I can just feel myself getting fatter right now. I'm disgusting. I would be happy if I just got skinny.
These are not the words or thoughts of a naturally thin person, but they might be the words or thoughts you say to yourself. I do think that generally speaking, what Bethenny talks about in this book are kind of the principles of intuitive eating. Eat when you want, how you want. Don't worry about counting your calories or do weird crash diets. But I think where Bethenny's book takes that extra step is she's like, listen, once you break yourself free from all of this diet culture, your body will be so tea. You're going to be so fucking skinny. You can stop. You can stop it all. The negative talk, the hatred of yourself and your body, the fear of food, the obsession with food, and most importantly, the dieting. Best of all, when you stop doing all these things to yourself, you will become naturally thin. I thought that was the thing we weren't supposed to be worrying about because we're breaking away from diet culture. Guys, this is not a diet. This is just 10 rules that you should live your daily life through. And if you do that, you will be supermodel like me. She still uses language that seeps through, that still feels like diet talk, just repackaged in a different way. One thing she talks about is the tendency that she used to have, that I think a lot of people have, where if she had a big event that night and felt like she was going to eat a bunch of fun snacks and stuff, she wouldn't really eat. Her advice instead of that is to say, don't skip meals beforehand. Eat before the event so you're not even tempted to eat at the thing. She says, spoiling your appetite with smart snacking is a good investment in your immediate and long-term future. You'll be able to enjoy just a few tastes of the very best things, and then you'll go home respecting yourself, feeling powerful, and in control of your own behavior. By the way, this is from the chapter called Taste Everything, Eat Nothing.
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that, you know what I mean? Like,
in this book, she has pockets of wisdom she likes to call her naturally thin thoughts. I have a lot of those too. She also has her heavy thoughts, which I guess is a nicer way to say your fat thoughts. She'll use classic 2000s diet talk phrases like guilt-free about bagels, where instead of just eating a bagel because you want to eat a bagel, you scoop out the insides and throw it out. Like that one Tyra Banks What I Eat in a Day video. She's saying, eat the bagel.
And I fill up the entire scooped out bagel rounds like a moat.
But make sure you scoop out half of it. And also, don't you dare finish it, because that's another one of her big rules. Don't finish food. She talks about canceling your membership to the Clean Plate Club, which I do think generationally is like a real thing. A lot of us had parents who, no matter what, at dinner had us finish our food, even if we were full, even if we didn't like it. Now, as adults, we realize that probably isn't the best habit. And in fact, if we're full, we don't have to feel bad about wasting food. Like, I think that's genuinely a good insight to tell people, especially people in her audience. But then she'll say something like this. Here's my general policy. If I eat a small portion of something really decadent, like ice cream, cake, or chips, I always try to leave at least 2 bites. If I order something large, like an entree or a big muffin at a bakery, I try to leave half, often sharing it with someone or saving half for later. That's another one of her strategies, is sharing food so that you don't feel like you have to eat as much of your own food. If I order something that I consider a good investment, but the portion is quite big, I try to leave a quarter on my plate. She does try and couch this by saying, don't worry about the numbers. You can start this process by simply leaving 1 or 2 bites of of something you would normally finish. When you are comfortable with that, gradually increase the amount you leave. See, when I read things like that, it feels so reminiscent of when I was dieting, but this isn't dieting. This is a lifestyle, and this is just how thin people eat. It's like the ritualizing of it. That's where it starts to get weird. Another one of her food rules is you can have it all, just not all at once. To be honest, all of the rules are kind of saying the same thing, just in different ways. It's all just kind of eat stuff, but in small portions and also don't finish it. She says, if you personally need fast food now and then, fine. Have a small hamburger, a small order of fries, and a bottle of water. Or skip the fries and get a small shake. Or get cheese on the burger, but forget the fries or the shake and get a side salad. I just don't think that having fast food for one meal, even if you get fries and a shake one time, it's not gonna kill you. And by the way, if you do indulge in something like fast food, your diet is a bank account. So you definitely do need to make that up later. So in her plan for everyday life, you're eating very healthy every meal, and you get 2 exceptions. Those 2 exceptions can include 2 bites of a really great dessert. Not the whole dessert, 2 bites. 2 bites of an overly rich entree like lasagna or fried food like calamari or fries. By the way, she says she has no fear foods, but she does say there are a few things that she forbids herself absolutely, and she recommends that you avoid them too. That being fettuccine alfredo, macaroni and cheese, pesto-laden pasta, drenched in oil, lasagna, stuffed shells, baked ziti, creamy vodka penne, all of those creamy, cheesy, oily pasta concoctions, and soda. She really doesn't want you to drink soda. I promise you, if you have a salad for lunch and then you want to have a whole cookie afterwards, you are fine. And you don't have to worry, okay? Unless you have health conditions that require you to make specific restrictions, you're okay, all right? Another piece of advice from Bethenny is if you ever find yourself at a fancy cocktail party, which Bethenny finds herself at quite often, don't just go around and take snacks that you like. No, you gotta scour the perimeter. Set your sights on everything. What looks good? Case it like you're preparing for a bank robbery. Then, and only then, once you've surveilled all of the food and assessed which ones is worthy, you can have a few bites of 2 or 3. And the best part of that strategy is all that time you're spent circling around like a vulture, you won't even have to pretend to have small talk with the people you hate at that cocktail party. There are also these bits where she talks about what she eats in a day, like as an example. I don't know Bethenny. For all I know, these anecdotes aren't even true, to be honest. There was this one in particular that just, honestly, it just kind of made me sad. She says, after dinner, I had 4 bites of the kids' chocolate sundaes. Later in the evening, I thought I didn't make the greatest choices today, but I still wanted something really sweet at night. I happened to have a piece of Bethenny Bakes vegan chocolate cake, but I didn't want to get started on the whole thing, so I just had one tiny bite of frosting. That's all I needed, but I did vow to have a better eating day tomorrow. This was not the best, most perfect example of a smart day of eating, and I realized that. Again, maybe this story isn't true and she wouldn't have thought about it if she wasn't writing the book, but I just feel like having guilt over eating 5 bites of dessert is just, it's not a way I want to live my life, I guess I'll say. She also does have recipes in here, and Bethenny's a natural food chef, so honestly, her recipes seem fine to me. This is another thing I will give her credit on. She is very against the no-fat sour cream, no-fat peanut butter that was like all the rage in the time that she was publishing this book. She does replace a lot of things with low-fat versions, which I'm pretty sure low-fat versions of things like cream cheese and peanut butter just have more air in them. So, whatever. She does have this one recipe for spicy broccoli that I just thought was incredible. 4 cups of broccoli, 1 small red bell pepper, 1 garlic clove, and half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and some lemon. That is just the whitest recipe I've ever heard. Listen, I'm torn. I feel bad because I feel like this book just is describing how Bethenny eats. I feel like a lot of self-help is just people writing from their own experience. And I don't want to just dunk on the way Bethenny eats because that works for her. It's truly none of my business. And I do think there are genuinely insightful things in there, moments of kindness. She has an entire chapter dedicated to binging, which made me very nervous. But genuinely, she spoke a lot from her own experience, and she was very kind and non-judgmental, and first and foremost talked about seeking professional help over anything. And in that chapter, she talked about the importance of not starving yourself all the time, being on these restrictive diets, because that's what leads to a binge and that's what makes you feel sick. And then you're just in this horrible loop. But she also mentions at the end, oh yeah, and also if you binge, no matter how much you diet in between, you're gonna gain weight. This book just feels like it was so close to getting the point. This book is long out of print, so, maybe Bethenny's thoughts on these things have evolved more with the times. I don't really know. But this was a pretty rough start in Bethenny's published works. Oh my gosh, my biggest issue with this book, I can't believe I even forgot to mention this, her recommendations for alcohol. She is very strictly anti-soda, anti-fettuccine Alfredo, but she is not, as the owner of a cocktail line, anti-alcohol, as you might imagine. She does, however, say that you should limit yourself to no more than 2 alcoholic drinks a day. I think it is worth mentioning that that is actually double what any health official would recommend in the US at the time that she put out this book. And I actually think they very recently revised it from 1 drink a day to women to just minimizing it at all because alcohol just is not that great for you. And I'm not saying that as a judgment towards Bethenny. I'm just saying that advice like that, being in a book about being naturally thin and being as healthy as you possibly can, that should be a reminder that she is not any sort of health professional. And you should maybe be taking the other advice she gives you with that same grain of salt. I just think that if it was as easy as Bethenny Frankel proclaims, we'd be seeing a lot more naturally thin people in the world, you know? Because nothing in this book is new information, not even new information for the time in 2009. I am going to give this book 1 Skinny Girl margarita out of 5. This was pretty bad. This was a pretty bad start. The Skinnygirl Dish, easy recipes for your naturally thin life. Fast, practical, economical. Listen, we just talked at length about how I hated Naturally Thin. This is the companion cookbook to Naturally Thin, which I actually read before Naturally Thin. Very confusing read because she often will refer back to the rules of Naturally Thin. And to be honest, if you read all 9 of Bethenny Frankel's published books in a row, as I did, you realize that she actually repeats herself a lot in all of these books. And so I felt like by the time I got to Naturally Thin, I already knew what she was going to say because pretty much all of it is also in here. That being said, you know, it would be fun for this video to be a straight dunk fest. I actually thought this book was pretty good. Bethenny Frankel is a chef. She's like actually qualified to talk about how to make food taste good. On one hand, I do wish that this was a traditional cookbook with pictures on the side because, you know, I like pictures. But on the other hand, I don't because I like to use cookbooks as displays on my bookshelf or my coffee table. And I can't imagine having friends over and them just seeing this, well, just making them feel bad for being there, for not being the skinny girl that I am. But you know what I actually really appreciated? I don't really have a strict label when it comes to my diet. I was vegan for many years and I'm plant-based now, I guess, for lack of a better word. I don't really eat dairy. I don't really eat meat. And so most traditional cookbooks that aren't at least plant-focused aren't really of use to me because they're centered around chicken and turkey and beef, and I will actually throw up, I think, at the thought of having to cook any of those things. It gives me the creeps. That's honestly what keeps me plant-based more than anything. Blech. But Bethenny got her start with Bethenny Bakes, making gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, like very allergen-friendly baked goods. The big selling point of this book is that you can modify it to any sort of dietary restriction that you have. And she includes specific instructions on if you want to make something without gluten, or if you want to make something vegetarian, or if you want to make something with chicken instead of beef. Like, this recipe book is very much centered on using what you have, not wasting food. Also, I don't know if everybody already knows about this and this is not exciting information, but Bethenny is really into using spike seasoning. That's kind of like her go-to seasoning mix for anything where she doesn't really have a recipe. She's just going with the vibes. She talked so much about how much she loved the spike seasoning that I went and got myself a jar, and you can't really tell, but it's almost empty. I've been obsessed with it. So this book was actually like the most positive addition to my life. As you can imagine, there's still a lot of words like guilt-free, and she does kind of skimp on things that are more calorically dense because that's kind of her whole vibe. But you know, you can modify it. That's what she says to do. So I am going to give the Skinnygirl Dish, honestly, like 4 Skinnygirl margaritas out of 5. I wish you could just get to the recipes. The thing is, you have to get through her spewing her diet talk from Naturally Thin to actually get to the recipes. But I like this book. Skinnygirl Cocktails. You knew this was coming. Bethenny Frankel started the Skinnygirl Liquor Company. She sold said Skinnygirl Liquor Company to Beam for reportedly over $100 million, although there is speculation that because she had multiple business partners in it, that she only got as little as $10 million. I mean, I don't even get out of bed in the morning unless it's 50 million, you know what I mean? Needless to say, Bethenny loves a good cocktail, and she is most famous for her Skinnygirl Margarita. So Bethenny does have an actual recipe for the Skinnygirl Margarita, which we're gonna try at a later time. But I first wanted to try the pre-made Skinnygirl Margarita that really created the skinny girl fortune, as it were. Now, I have had this before. Ironically enough, it was when I had an eating disorder in college, but that is not Bethenny's fault. I didn't buy it again, so maybe that's a sign of how I liked it. I don't really remember. We're gonna give this a try. It's supposed to be skinny, I presume. There aren't actually any ingredients on here, so I don't really know what's actually in this. Oh, it does have the calories, not the ingredients, but just the calories. That's all that matters, right? I'm gonna preface this by saying I don't expect this to be good. It was $13, which is suspiciously cheap, I would say. Bethenny sold the company many, many years ago, and she has said publicly that Beam kind of ran Skinnygirl into the ground after the fact. So for all I know, they've changed the recipe from Bethenny's original Skinnygirl formulation, but let's give it a try. Maybe it'll be my new favorite thing, and you won't even be able to see me. Like, I won't even be able to get on a ride at Disneyland. I'll be so small. Okay, I also don't have a proper margarita glass, so we're just working with this. I give it its best shot. I heavily salted the rim. If you put sugar on your margarita rim, grow up. It smells like margarita mix and a headache, so that's probably what I'm in for. I'm gonna try a sip without the salt, because maybe that's what made it taste really bad. It tastes like perfume and those hint of lime Tostitos chips. Bethenny Frankel Naturally Thin rule number 7, cancel your membership to the Clean Plate Club. Bethenny Frankel Naturally Thin rule number 3, taste everything, eat nothing. I am going to embody those rules, and I am not going to drink any more of this. All right, it is magically a few hours later. I look more exhausted than when I began. I am in this big blank white void. Okay, so the pre-made Skinnygirl margarita was a bust, but in fairness, Bethenny may have at one point sold it for money, but she does not sell it anymore, so I can't really put that on her. I am going to try some of Bethenny's recipes now. There are some recipes from Bethenny that kind of show up in every single recipe book. She has a lychee martini that's everywhere, the Skinnygirl margarita. She has this really depressing low-cal spinach artichoke dip that I just did not really want to set myself up for a bad time with that. I wanted to try her mock-a-mole, which does appear in her Skinnygirl Cocktail book, but also I'm pretty sure it's in a couple of these as well. This was in the 2000s and fat was bad. Bethenny wasn't strictly anti-fat, but she definitely promoted lower fat things. And so what makes this guacamole recipe in particular special is that there's avocado in here, but also about half a cup of cooked peas. Her ratios are a little bit strange. Like, she wanted 1 tablespoon of chopped red onion, but 2 tablespoons of chopped cilantro, which that does just feel a little bit backwards to me. And also she had us put everything in an immersion blender. So even though this is homemade, it kind of all just sort of blends into one mush, and then it's just cilantro for garnish on top. I'm more like to see the individual ingredients, but I feel like that's a personal preference thing. You know, I don't really talk about this, but I'm actually not just any white girl. I'm a quarter Hispanic. Yeah, mi gente. And my parents both grew up in Southern California, so I take avocados, guacamole very seriously. And it's something that I don't like to see messed with or skinified in any particular way. So I am dubious. I'm probably gonna like it because I just like avocados, but also I'm scared. Anyways, I'm gonna stop being a hater before I've literally already tried it. Ashley, shut up. And I'm gonna have it. I also don't have tortilla chips. I forgot that last minute, but I'm gonna put this over rice and beans. It's gonna get eaten regardless. You know, I'm only a quarter Hispanic, so I guess I can only be a quarter offended. Let's try the Skinnygirl margarita. Turns out I actually do have cocktail glasses. I just literally never make cocktails at home. Oh my God. Okay, woo, someone's getting a little crazy. We're gonna try it. So basically what makes this a Skinnygirl margarita and not a regular margarita is there's no simple syrup and there's much less triple sec. So it's pretty much just tequila, lime juice, still a little bit of triple sec, and that's it. It's basically a gimlet, isn't it? It's literally just a gimlet. Anyways, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like it, so. I mean, I'm down with it. Granted, tequila is like the only liquor I will drink straight up or just with soda. Everything else I need watered down. So I feel like I'm kind of an easy get for Bethenny, but I didn't want to be too much of a hater in this video. And so I wanted to try things that I thought I would actually like. I was tempted to try the spicy Latina because, you know, that's so a quarter me. But I ended up going with the blue Mexico because a lot of the recipes in the Skinnygirl Cocktail book, there's a lot of like basic ones that felt not too adventurous. And honestly, that's fine. I feel like I'm way too used to Tom Sandoval, who's combining dry ice with chipotle peppers and cotton candy, just making the most devious concoction he possibly could and calling it gourmet. Like, I feel like we do need to go back to the basics a little bit, and I'm fine with that. So I wanted to try this because it was slightly more adventurous. The Blue Mexico is basically, unfortunately, just like a margarita, so kind of bad for review purposes. It's tequila, triple sec, a lemon sour mix, which is 2 parts lemon, 1 part homemade simple syrup, muddled blueberries, and 1 inch of yellow bell pepper, which I thought made it slightly more interesting, although I realized that it's honestly probably gonna, that's a pretty mild flavor, yellow bell pepper, so it's probably just gonna taste like a blueberry margarita, and it's gonna be delicious, so I mean, I'm not complaining. Whoa, you actually can taste the bell pepper, that's kind of crazy. I'm not mad at it. It's kind of got like a little bit of a sweet but earthy thing going on. Bethenny, you're crazy, girl. And I'm going to have all 2 of these because, you know, Bethenny said in Naturally Thin that is okay for me to do. Cookie Meets Peanut. As you can tell, this is the singular children's book in her collection. And I assume most of them don't normally come as beat up as this particular copy. But you know what? The story, you can read it. It's fine. If you don't know, Cookie isn't just a New Jeans song. It was also the name of Bethenny's beloved dog, rest in peace. And Peanut is the nickname of Bethenny's daughter, Bryn. And this is basically just the story of how Bethenny brought Bryn home, and initially these 2 didn't get along. It's hard for Cookie to not get the attention because Bryn is getting the attention, but then they become friends. I don't have children myself, so, you know, I'm not the target audience for this in any sort of way, but it's a cute little book. The illustrations are cute. It's very simple. Not a whole lot happens. It's just like a slice of life book. There's not any sort of poetry to it or anything. But to be honest, I feel like the value of a children's book for the most part is just you sitting and reading with your kid. And also this feels so sentimental to Bethenny specifically that, you know, it doesn't really feel like something I'm gonna be like, oh, she loves her kid and her dog. So I'm gonna give this 5 mocktail Skinny Girl margaritas out of 5. A place of yes. Y'all ever heard of The Secret? Well, Bethenny Frankel has, and she's coming for her gig. This is the closest we've gotten to a true Bethenny Frankel memoir. God, I yearn for that. I yearn for that. Because say what you will about Bethenny, Bethenny has lived a life. I could just listen to her talk about her life forever. She explicitly says that this is not a memoir. This is just her sort of walking through different aspects of her life. She'll tell the story about how she uncovered one of the biggest Russian crime rings in the US when she attempted to get back some stolen jewelry from her through eBay. And she'll just turn to the audience and go, and this is why you should start a vision board. And it's like, okay, Bethenny, I don't really know. Maybe there doesn't need to be a moral. Maybe we could just hear you talk, because I don't necessarily know if Bethenny is the best at connecting what is useful from her life experiences to what is tangible advice to the everyday woman in Minnesota who is reading her books. This book is the most that Bethenny really talks about her origin story in detail when it comes to her childhood and her relationships. And so I wanted to go through some of it because I do think that a key part to who Bethenny is her origin story. That is a really obvious thing to say. But anyways, we're going to read this stuff. Bethenny said, I had my first drink when I was 7 years old. I was betting at the track by the age of 8. Before I was in grade school, I was calling the police to stop my mother and stepfather from fighting. They would haul him away, and the next day, my mother and I would scan the ads for apartments. But we never left, and I never understood why. I attended multiple schools because my parents couldn't stay in one place. I was partying at clubs in the city when I was 14 and crashing expensive cars before I had a driver's license. This was my normal. Bethenny's mom was really young when she had her, and from what Bethenny knows, her mom experienced a lot of abuse at the hands of her grandfather, which her mom definitely was not healed from in any way by the time that she had Bethenny. She describes taking Bethenny out to really fancy restaurants, ordering large portions of things, and forcing Bethenny to eat those portions with her, and then excusing herself to go to the bathroom for long periods of time. Her parents divorce when she's really young, and Bethenny's mother quickly remarries Bethenny's stepfather, and so Bethenny's mom ends up moving across the country basically to start a new life with Bethenny's stepfather and leaving Bethenny in her dad's care. And her dad is very prolific in the horse world, but he spends a lot of time gambling or on the track, employs nannies who Bethenny says are physically abusive to her. Later on, Bethenny starts living again with her stepfather and her mother, and she says that her stepfather is much more of a parent to her than even her own mom was at any particular point. but he was really erratic with their finances. She says that they would often go from having 6 sports cars in the driveway to selling all their furniture and moving to a new place because they couldn't make rent. Bethenny does say that she grew up pretty well off, but I do think she kind of understates just how well off they are. She went to multiple private schools throughout her life. In fact, because she was moving back and forth, she went to 13 private schools. Actually, one of those boarding schools that she went to was Pinecrest, which was the same school that Ariana Grande went to growing up. So even though Bethenny herself didn't grow up necessarily with a strong family connection, she was always in and around elite circles in her life. Then Bethenny gets into her relationship history, which even at the time that she was publishing this book was pretty fraught. She got married to her first husband at 26, and she basically says that she was in this relationship because she felt like that was the thing that you had to do at the time. But pretty quickly she realized that relationship wasn't right for her. And they're still friends to this day, although they weren't for a period of time, because Bethenny then very quickly moved on to her ex-husband's best friend, who was the usher at their wedding, Larry. Bethenny and Larry have a very volatile on-off relationship for many years. He proposes to her a bunch of times. She says no. They break up for a long time. Then they take this whirlwind vacation after they've been broken up, where she's like, actually, you know what? I will marry you. And he's like, ooh, I was not gonna marry you. But then by the end of the vacation, Larry actually does propose to Bethenny, and Bethenny says yes, which, like, girl, stand up. I mean, she knows this now, but thankfully her and Larry don't end up getting married. She breaks things off, and then she immediately jumps from short-term relationship to short-term relationship before she gets with another guy who is rich. And if Bethenny Frankel is calling him rich, that must mean he's a very wealthy man. And this guy, he's hot, he's successful, and all of Bethenny's friends are so jealous because he is just the most perfect man that you could ever meet. But Bethenny knows in her heart that it just isn't right, and so she breaks it off, but he does let her keep the $40,000 diamond engagement ring that he gave her. And that is where we get to the Russian crime ring of it all. Bethenny does a lot of mythologizing about her early business successes, that she was like really scrappy and coming up from nothing, and she was driving around this beat up car that no one liked, and she had this tiny apartment that she couldn't afford. It was on the Upper East Side of New York City, but she couldn't afford it. In the early 2000s, Bethenny starts a business called Bethenny Bakes, and I just found the way that she talked about this business to be incredibly fascinating. Let me read to you. I hired anybody I could find who was willing to work, and I mean anybody. A more motley crew you've never seen. Some who didn't speak English. We worked all night, and by 6 a.m., my assistant, Damona, there's an assistant and she has multiple employees. Even if some of them don't speak English, they're still employees, trying to get the cookies out in time. Then we loaded up that $500 car, that dingy little $500 car that she has, and headed out to all the bodegas and delis, not having slept for 24 hours. Being a prostitute would have been a lot easier, more dignified, more lucrative, and frankly, more glamorous.
Oh, that's no. In the sense that, no. You know what I mean? Like,
most people who are like struggling to get by don't necessarily have a team of like 10 plus people that they're also responsible for. But anyways, Bethenny Bakes is struggling financially. And one of the pieces of advice that she gives actually to young entrepreneurs looking to get their start is to look through your closet. Listen, I know that everybody has some vintage couture just laying in the back of their closet that they could resell to keep their business going. And so Bethenny, as she says, she was barely getting by. I had a lot of money noise, and I often felt desperate. However, I also have a few irons in the fire. And often in my life, when things are tough, I'll sell something I own that is worth some money. It's also worth mentioning that she says that she's been collecting designer watches since she was 13 years old. You gotta really get on the ground floor. I should have bought a house in 2008. Things would have been really different. It was one of those times, and I had an idea of how I could keep my business limping along a little bit longer. She has this 5-carat diamond engagement ring. And back in the day, I guess with eBay, PayPal wasn't a thing. So you were just kind of relying on people actually sending you money when they purchased something off of eBay. So she sold a diamond ring and shipped it, but she sent it out before she got the check. So she sells this ring for $42,000 and then doesn't hear anything back from this person. She calls the cops, and as all cops do, they don't do anything, but she is not going to let this rest. All right, she is like Lady Gaga on January 6th. She is looking for clues, and she says, my boyfriend at the time hired a private detective in New York, someone who was well known for being the best in his field, but he turned out to be worthless. He told me to fax him everything because he didn't have email either. Nobody would help me. I was desperate. I didn't leave my tiny studio apartment for days. She said, I realized that I had to come from a place of yes and make this happen. Because remember, this is the premise of this book. She said, I began to formulate a plan with just my crappy little computer, her brand new Mac probably. I vowed to succeed where the cops had failed. So she develops this scheme where she starts messaging back and forth the seller. She figures out that the address that they gave her was fake. The seller's name is something like Corvette 123, and all of the positive reviews on the website are Buick 757, Prius 451, like they're all different sock accounts. And she thinks to herself, this guy is probably just going to try and resell my diamond ring on eBay again. And because this is like an actual fancy diamond ring, she has a GIA certificate of authenticity she can then match up with her stolen ring. So she finds someone selling her exact ring with the GIA documents numbers changed slightly. And so she decides that she's going to go to where they're selling it, which just happens to be in New York City, and she is going to go with ammunition. So she does what any of us would do, and she calls up her friends at the New York Post and Fox News. She pitches them the story that she is about to uncover this crime ring and they're going to want to be there on the ground floor. She also calls up the cops and tells them that she's going to be there at this time and this time. And unless they want to get dogged on by the New York Post, they better have their ass ready there to make some arrests. Initially, the New York Post and the police are not interested. So she goes there herself. She asks to try on her own engagement ring. You know, she's undercover and she's able to verify that it is definitely her ring. And she asks for a copy of the GIA certificate, which then she now has evidence to prove that they have forged it and it is actually her diamond ring. So she goes back to the police and the New York Post the next day. And because the police actually have evidence, they're like, okay, yeah, I guess we'll do our job. And so they come in, arrest the person, and turns out this was part of a huge crime ring that was all solved thanks to our hero, Bethenny Frankel. The lesson of this story is to come from a place of yes. She says, you won't always get the proverbial ring back. Your business won't always earn millions. You won't always get what you think you deserve. But if you always give it your all, if you always go for it with everything you've got, you won't ever have to have any regrets. You know, sometimes I think a story can just be interesting and we don't have to have like a parable at the end of it. But this is supposed to be a book framed around life lessons from Bethenny's insane life. She tells this other story in her business advice section about how one time she was at Neiman Marcus and she saw this beautiful $500 pashmina. And she was like, I know that these pashminas are going to be the hottest, newest thing, and I want to be there on the ground floor. But the thing is, sweet humble Bethenny does not have $500. So she calls up her assistant that she has on payroll and she's like, all right, let's call the manufacturers who produce this pashmina and let's see how much it costs to bulk order these pashminas, and I will make up the cost of buying one for myself by drop shipping it to all of my friends and family. The minimum order was 10 at $110 each. I checked around with some people I knew who were more fashion forward than I was, and I did a little research. There was interest. People were buying them. I started to realize that maybe I was onto something. Maybe I was hitting a moment in women's fashion. Could I possibly sell more than 9 pashminas? I contacted some friends with connections to celebrities, as you do, and got a great response. My next thought was that maybe I could get pashminas even cheaper from India. I contacted the source in India, and sure enough, if I ordered 50, I could get them for $68. I decided to come from a place of yes and go for it. I realized that this could be a major opportunity. I trusted my intuitive ability to spot a trend and shelled out $3,400 that I didn't have, wiring that money to a total stranger in Bombay in exchange for the promise of 50 pashminas. For all I knew, I was sending all the money I had in the world off to some scam artist, but I just had a feeling I was on the ground floor of something. This is $3,400 in the early 2000s, by the way. And of course, everyone claps. She starts having pashmina parties. Everyone loves her pashminas. But unfortunately, her pashmina empire falls apart because she starts this trend, right? Everybody's into pashminas. But then all of these other companies start selling pashminas and they're way more accessible. And because she doesn't have an accountant at the time, she is paying too much in taxes, according to her. And so that is when she pivots to her Skinnygirl empire. I tell you this story because I turned something as simple as a fashion choice into a profitable business. Necessity is the mother of invention. I couldn't afford a pashmina. I couldn't afford a $500 pashmina, so I spent $3,400 on a pashmina. I do think, generally speaking, something I notice about Bethenny is it's not that she doesn't admit that her family is wealthy, but she kind of is vague or undersells it. And I don't say that to say that she didn't have a hard childhood. Like, I absolutely believe her. her. It more so becomes relevant when she talks about how she got into various business ventures. She talks about it as if she's someone, down on her luck, who doesn't know anybody, doesn't have any connections, when in fact, she was someone who, at the very least, grew up around very elite people and had connections, even if it wasn't her family members giving her a job, like something that outright. There's one story in the book where she talks about how she first became an event planner in LA back when she was initially trying to become an actor. And she talks about how her very first job as an event planner, when she had never done anything else, is she is running single-handedly a party for Disney on Alcatraz Island with a 7-figure budget. Maybe Disney does just happen to entrust things like parties to random 20-somethings with no experience. But I just have a feeling that somewhere along the line, Bethenny knew somebody important who could vouch for her. Or maybe she's just exaggerating her title in that. Maybe she wasn't like the sole event planner like she describes in the book. It just becomes odd when she's talking about these really grandiose things that happened in her life as if she sort of stumbled into them, when in fact she's a very driven person, and she's someone who is very well connected. Her whole thing is say yes to opportunities, take risks. You never know where life will take you. Look at me. I have all of these successful businesses. I'm on a hit TV show, and it all just came from me saying yes, and had nothing to do with the fact that I came from a well-known white wealthy family. One story, which is sort of like the central thesis of this book, is how she even got on Real Housewives in the first place. She got there because she happened to be at a polo event in the Hamptons with her best friend at the time, Jill Zarin. Jill and her husband, Bobby, had a very successful interior design business in New York City related to luxury real estate. And because of that, Jill Zarin was asked by Bravo to be a part of this new show they were working on. It was like Mommies in New York City, or it wasn't Real Housewives at the time. And she recommended Bethenny to it, even though Bethenny was not a mom or a housewife herself. And so Bethenny goes through this whole spiel of how she was able to pitch herself on the show, despite the fact that she was just this down on her luck gal who just had a tiny apartment in New York City that she could barely afford. And it's like, Bethenny, you had already been on The Apprentice by this point with Martha Stewart. You came in second. Of course, people were interested in you for reality TV. You had already proven that you were good at that. And that's not an opportunity that a lot of people have as like a jumping off point. I will give Bethenny that probably relative to the other housewives at the time she started on season 1, she was not nearly as rich or established. Plus, she had invested a lot of her money in her various companies. So she didn't really have disposable income to spare because her companies had become her disposable income. But she was still well connected enough to be at this polo event in the Hamptons with people who were friends and acquaintances with Donald Trump prior to being on the show. Bethenny Frankel is a hustler. I do not deny that. She is a very driven person. She clearly loves a network. She loves a connection. But also, there is a big heaping of privilege and luck that also got her to where she is. So I again say perhaps couch her advice in a grain of salt. Although, to be honest, I feel like the advice is such a small portion of this book. I enjoyed this book because I love hearing Bethenny yap. I really do wish that she would just make a standalone memoir. But since this is the closest we've got to that, I am going to give this 3 Skinny Girl margaritas out of 5. Skinnygirl Solutions. I don't really know how to feel because this one definitely has just the most fine advice, but it also does feel like the most half-hearted book on Bethenny's attempt. And I kind of don't blame her for it. So for context, Bethenny left Real Housewives of New York after season 3. Then she had her own spin-off shows called Bethenny's Getting Married and Bethenny Ever After, which I have not watched, but in it she's getting married to her then husband, Jason, who is the father of her child. Bethenny actually talked at length in A Place of Yes about Jason, and it's actually kind of a bummer to read in hindsight because she speaks really highly of Jason, but she also says that she very much had doubts about her relationship with him, that they broke up multiple times before the wedding, that she almost didn't go through with the wedding, but she's like, but now we're married and it's so great. They separate a year after A Place of Yes comes out. They were married for only 2 years. Then Bethenny's ex-husband drags their divorce out for nearly 10 years. They don't get officially divorced until 2021. Bethenny did not really speak in specifics about how that all went down out of respect for her daughter and for her husband, but there are things in the public court filings, and also she very recently, I believe this year, has spoken about the hell that was her divorce in her podcast. Doesn't really feel like my thing to speak about, but needless to say, it was a very bitter divorce. It was a very expensive divorce, and it was not a divorce that she was really able or wanting to talk about. This book comes out right when that is sort of at the forefront of the headlines. She very plainly states at the front of the book that, I know y'all are interested in my relationship and divorce, but I'm not going to talk about that at all in this book, which I think is very fair. But I do just kind of get the sense that Bethenny's heart was not really into providing Skinnygirl Solutions at the time. And I can't say that I blame her. But on the other hand, this was a product that she sold for money. This book is the most straightforward, I think, of her books. It's kind of just a how-to guide on how to do life. She has a chapter on how to sleep well. Actually, she has a chapter on how to sleep well in pretty much all of her books, even the business book. She has a chapter on how to organize her closet. She has a chapter, of course, on diet. I mean, it says right here, it's got naturally thin. She kind of just reiterates the naturally thin advice. It's a lot of recycled advice from her previous book, A Place of Yes, and Naturally Thin. But again, if you're not reading all these in a row, I guess that's not a problem. A lot of this book is about how to clean the house, how to organize stuff. There is one delightful chapter where she just breaks down the different apps in an iPhone because she has at the time switched from using a BlackBerry to an iPhone. It is kind of funny to read her chapters about cleaning and organizing because she will sort of list all of the advice that she has, and then at the end she'll briefly mention that she has an assistant or a housekeeper or someone who does those things for her now, but this is how she would do it if she did do it. There's also illustrations in this book, which are not in any of the other books, and even though this book came out in like 2013, there's something very 2007 about it, which I think is kind of delightful. I feel like any advice I had qualms with, we've already discussed through the other books. Everything else was just sort of inoffensive lifestyle tips. It just didn't really move me in any particular way or another. So for that, I'm going to give it 2.5 Skinny Girl margaritas out of 5.
Skinnydipping, a novel by Bethenny Frankel. Hi, it's the next day if you can't tell. I'm a YouTuber. I'm not used to working more than 2 hours at a time. I also today was trying to give English teacher that all the gay closeted kids in high school confide in, but I think I'm more giving Sylvia Brown, unfortunately. Bethenny Frankel would never recommend this look in Skinnygirl Solutions. I truly have absorbed nothing valuable from this process, and I only have myself to blame. This is the one and only fiction novel in Bethenny Frankel's collection, and I am honestly so disappointed that we didn't see more of these because this may just be her most unhinged work to date. For all the rhony fans watching, you may notice this cover is a reference to Bethenny Frankel's infamous PETA anti-fur campaign, although that is in dispute.
PETA isn't saying don't wear fur, they're saying don't abuse animals. I'm not abusing animals, I'm just wearing fur.
Because if you think about it, has PETA ever really said that they're anti-fur? You can probably tell by the amount of post-it notes on the side of this thing. I had a time reading this book, and I knew I had to have my full energy devoted to talking about it. Even though this book is fiction, it is about a character named Faith. That character named Faith just so happens to have just about all of the same qualities, history, life events that Bethenny Frankel has. And this book largely follows major origin points in Bethenny Frankel's own lore. I will preface this by saying I'm going to make fun of this book. I'm going to make fun of this character Faith. It is kind of hard to tell where Faith ends and Bethenny Frankel herself begins, but maybe that's why you shouldn't publish weird fan fiction of your own life for other people to consume, because at least in this case it doesn't always translate to a fictional story the way it was probably meant to. In summary, this book is about Faith, who is the daughter of an infamous horse guy and an alcoholic mother who we don't really see too much in the book. She has just graduated from NYU. She's flying to LA to become an actor. She then stumbles into this world of celebrity event planning and being a personal assistant to various celebrities. There's then a major time jump, and suddenly we are in Martha Stewart's apprentice show. Martha Stewart has a different name in this book, but it just is Martha Stewart, and that is the last 2/3 of the book. The first half and the second half aren't really related in any sort of tangible way. Again, I realize that this is actually how Bethenny's life path went, but that's why narrative arcs, even the ones that are based on some aspect of real life, tend to have some fiction fiction added in to make some sort of logical sense, because real life is not logical and it's hard to follow a lot of times if you're just sitting and explaining it. I also have no idea if this book is meant to be set in the modern day, like in 2012 when this was published, or if it's meant to take place at the same time this happened in Bethenny Frankel's life. Let me give you some examples of characters that are supposed to be in their mid-20s. Sherry Jacobs, Jodie Sue, Donna Shannon, and Susan Terrence are supposed to be the hottest actors on the soap opera circuit, and that is relevant to whatever time that this book takes place. Let's just assume that this is a book that takes place outside of things like time. This book begins the day after Faith has graduated from NYU, and she is just being a little gremlin in first class. Faith walks onto this plane late as usual because she's so crazy. And she says, "Who do I have to sleep with to get a drink on this plane?" I'm rarely what you would call appropriate. Although what these people around me didn't seem to realize was that tequila was always appropriate. She keeps pestering the flight attendant for her glass of champagne for her flight at 9 in the morning. The plane hasn't even taken off and she really needs to get it right now. And when the flight attendant tells her that she's gonna get it just to be patient, Faith is like, this flight attendant's kind of a bitch. She just maxed out one of her credit cards that has a $30,000 limit, which I don't know, maybe they give that out to recent college graduates. That feels incredibly high to me, on designer shoes. And she says that everybody can tell that she doesn't actually belong in this first class cabin. Well, then how did she get this ticket if she doesn't belong there? And why is she in a designer outfit and spraying Chanel No. 5 all over herself? All over her crotch, actually, that's what the book says. But she's quirky, she doesn't fit in. She then sits next to this guy who just so happens to be a producer for soap operas, and even though he says that he's married and has a daughter about Faith's age, Faith begins to put her hand on his knee just for a little flirty fun, nothing serious. I respect the hustle, but then the man asks for her name and he's like, oh, like the daughter of that famous horse trainer. And only then does the producer offer her a role as a PA. I mean, for all I know, this actually happened to Bethenny, but I do think it's wild that even in this fantasy fiction version, Bethenny/Faith's dad is still famous enough to get recognized by a producer, and just coincidentally, 3 paragraphs afterwards, he's offering her a job. This is the issue with writing a fiction book that so closely mirrors her own personal life. Faith tells this one story to a guy she's talking to, that one time in high school, she got offered the role of an understudy, and because she wanted the lead, she rejected the understudy role altogether, even though getting the understudy at 14 years old was a super big deal. That's a story from Bethenny's real life, but she's having Faith say it. It feels uncomfortable to critique the narrative dissonance that is in this book, where Faith talks about her dad being so absent and how she's had to get everything without him, but then the other characters in this book are very well aware of him. She lives with her dad for several months in LA in this book, no questions asked. She crashes his Mercedes-Benz drunk one time in this book. Her dad, Faith's dad, just buys her a brand new car after that. This is what I mean, where it's just, I can't tell what's real and what's not. And so I want to say that I'm trying to go off of this as a book and critiquing narratives and critiquing people's real life experience and the way they feel about them. Those are two different things. For the first third of this book, nothing is truly happening. Faith is out there trying to become an actor, but she keeps stumbling into these super high profile jobs, seemingly entirely by accident. At one point, while she's a PA on that soap opera, one of the producers offers her this home in Malibu that they're using as a set that she can just live in for free for 6 months with her roommate and her dog. No questions asked. Faith becomes a personal assistant to a famous movie director, which Bethenny in real life also did. Although in the book, Faith stops being a personal assistant to this movie director because the movie director's producer best friend is found dead in his pool one day. And it never gets mentioned again. And I had to Google, Bethenny worked for Jerry Bruckheimer. Did he murder someone? Is this lore that I'm not aware of? I don't know. I feel like Bethenny might know something and she's trying to tell us in this book. She also goes out with a lot of guys in the first part of the book, and it's confusing because they all kind of have generic white guy names like Joe and Steve. They're all introduced with the same level of narrative importance, whether they're a character that she just has a fling with for like 2 pages, or they're a character that will reoccur for many chapters to come and then not be mentioned again in the second half of the book. All you need to know is that every man who meets Faith does instantly fall in love with her, whether they're married, whether they're her boss, whether they're just some random high-profile actor that she meets at a bar, and all of the other women are incredibly jealous because of that. In fact, I bet you're wondering why this book is even called Skinnydipping in the first place. It's called that because one night when she first gets to LA, Faith goes out with her dad's girlfriend, who is also her age, named Brooke. Brooke and Faith go to this bar. Faith starts making out with this super famous actor, even though she doesn't even know who he is. And he's like so impressed that she doesn't know who he is. And she's not like other girls. And she just like treats him like a person. And it's so crazy. And Donna and Susan are so jealous because they're supposed to be the super famous actors. And he doesn't care about them. He just cares about Faith. But then it turns out that he's married. And so then Faith goes skinny dipping in the pool outside. And the guy Brooke was talking to, Brooke was dating Faith's dad, but Brooke is talking to a different guy at the party. Whatever. The guy Brooke was talking to then tries to grope, then I keep saying Bethenny instead of Faith. Faith, the guy Brooke was talking to, who is not Faith's dad, tries to grope Faith in the pool, and Brooke is really upset about that. And then Faith tries to chase after Brooke because Brooke is upset, and that's where Faith gets into a drunk driving accident where she totals her dad's car, and her dad buys her a new Mercedes-Benz because of that. So that's where the title of the book comes from. Oh, wait, sorry. Her dad doesn't buy her a new Mercedes-Benz. That would be silly. No, he actually only buys her a Ford Escort after she totaled his car drunk driving and risked not only her life, but all of the lives around her that night. She says, I tried to be grateful, but I kept thinking, an Escort? You're rich, and you're gonna buy your only daughter a used Ford Escort? I dreaded pulling into the beach club parking lot in that thing. But what choice did I have? Donna and Susan are the lead actresses of the soap opera Faith is a PA on. And so Faith walks up to them in the VIP section of the club and just starts pestering them. She's like, hey, hi, hello, I love your work. Hi, I'm actually friends with the producer, and so I actually got a job as a PA. And she goes to touch one of their arms because they're like trying to lean away from her. She's being weird. And they're like, did you just touch me? And Faith is like, I mean, yeah, I did touch you. And they're like, don't touch me, weirdo. Like, I don't know you. And Faith goes, I was humiliated. I felt ridiculous standing there in my cheap red dress with some lame TV star's personal bodyguard staring me down. I turned away and plunged into the crowd. This was going to ruin my entire week. I'd been smacked down, and I wanted to get as far away from those two bitches as possible. And yet something inside me bucked against this treatment. I'd show them who was worthy. I'd get a job on their show, and soon they'd know exactly who I was, and they would be sorry they ever treated me that way. They had the chance to befriend me on my way up, and they blew it. Screw them both. This is on page 22 of the book, by the way. This is like the introduction to Faith as a character, a person we're meant to be rooting for. On the off chance that you also want to read this book, Faith does have a very prevalent eating disorder in the first third of the book, and it's only really mentioned in passing. Like, it isn't really given a lot of weight in the narrative or the story. It's much more focused on her dating escapades and her job. So for a while, you're just thinking, is this book trying to give me psychological damage? Like, why am I hearing about all of these times where she's binging and then starving herself? Why am I hearing her inner thoughts about how little she weighs and how little every other female character weighs and how she wants to compare her body? But then in the second half of the book, she just casually mentions that actually after 5 years, she healed her eating disorder. And so they describe Faith ordering food for everyone at the restaurant like so. We'll have 1 arugula salad, 1 roasted beet salad, 1 order of calamari with harissa mayo. We'd also like the goat cheese tart with the leeks, 1 order of mussels, 1 order of the bar steak with butter, and 1 order of the steak frites with béarnaise. Girl, I don't know. I looked around. Does that sound like enough for everyone? They all nodded eagerly. I handed the menu back to the waiter. Thanks. And please don't bring back the bread basket. For context, that food is supposed to be enough for 6 people. But I just, again, from someone who has had to overcome issues like this myself, taking note of and like hyper focusing on how healthy you're eating now that you're so recovered, just in my experience, that was a time where I was not as recovered as I thought I was. And I was, in fact, in deep denial about that. And so throughout the second part, we get all of these little details where like the plot is happening and then she has to stop the plot to tell you the very healthy meal that she ate when everybody else was just eating protein bars and energy drinks, but she's so healthy and she made herself an omelet with a side salad. The way this character's healing is written, the time jump where we don't actually see the recovery doesn't help things at all. It just doesn't feel complete. And because we don't really get to see the internal work, we just see her listing off how healthy she eats now compared to then, it all just feels like, why did this have to be a part of the book where the primary plot is about her competing on Celebrity Apprentice or whatever they called it in this universe, because Celebrity Apprentice, I assume, was copyrighted. Right. So we get about 70 pages of her struggling and doing random things in Los Angeles. And then we get part 2 and we get this time jump where it's Faith's character on the phone with a woman named Gloria from the credit card company. And she's basically lore dumping to Gloria about everything that happened in these 5 years because, you know, tell don't show. I think that's what they say. And she's like, listen, Gloria, I'm totally going to pay back the credit cards and all this stuff. But the thing is, I had this boyfriend and he wanted to invest all this money in my business that I was starting up. And so then him and I got this really expensive lease for this baking company that I'm starting. But then it turns out that he didn't have the money and he was a total scammer and he's gone. So Gloria, come on, girl. You know you've been there. Please just give me a few more weeks to pay this credit card company. I am really going to make it as a baker now, because even though I spent the first 70 pages of this book trying to be an actor, now being a baker is my lifelong dream, and you just have to get with that. I know Bethenny herself wanted to be an actor, then she went to culinary school. Actually, she said she just went to culinary school for fun, and I forget which one of her books it was. It all blends together at this point. And then that became like her career interests, her goals. But in the novel, we get no explanation why she pivoted. It's 5 years later, and this is who she is now. This is her lifelong passion. It feels like the first part of this book where she's just sort of fucking around and sleeping with guys in LA and harassing soap opera stars had to be in there so that we could get this book over 300 pages, because books that are shorter are a lot harder to sell in the market. Like, that's genuinely how I feel. But anyways, she gets on Celebrity Apprentice with Martha Stewart. I mean, Sybil Hunter. But the thing is, Sybil Hunter is like on Faith's neck from day one because one of Sybil Hunter's co-judges, Faith, dated prior to being on the show. And Sybil's like, well, that's just not fair that you literally had a romantic relationship with the guy who's judging you. I'm just going to kick you off of the show. And the co-judge is like, no, that's not a problem. And Faith's like, oh my God, why are you coming at me? She's literally trying to take me down for no reason. But then Faith and her gay co-contestant Chaz, who gets eliminated after saying honey a bunch of times and not much else, they dazzle Sybil with Faith's incredible skinny cocktail recipe. And so they can't eliminate Faith because she's too good of TV. Sybil's son, Harry, comes out and she's like, oh my gosh, my billionaire son is also going to be a guest judge. This is so fun. Harry and Faith look at each other and they're like, oh my God, we totally made out at the bar last night and we're totally in love with each other. So then it becomes this secret relationship between Harry and Faith. They'll be on camera making out while Sybil isn't looking. And Harry's like, don't worry, babes. I am the son of fictional Martha Stewart. I can just get this footage cut out of the show. But also in the competition, Faith has a best friend named Sherry, as people in their mid-20s are often named Sherry. Faith keeps telling Sherry all of her secrets about how she's hooked up with all of these people connected with the show, and that seems to give her an unfair advantage. Sherry has the nerve, when it's them in the top 2, to turn around and go, Sybil, just so you know, Faith has been hooking up with your son this entire time. And I just think that maybe it's not fair for her to win in those circumstances. That wicked witch. But the thing is, the audience loves Faith. Everybody loves Faith. She has these incredible ideas. She has this one genius idea for a hot dog stand. Let's call it What's Up Dog. And everybody laughed. Anytime Faith is in the room, people are hooting and hollering because she is a genius and her ideas are perfect, but also these women can't stand her. They want to be her. How does she stay so skinny? So I'm sure you're wondering how this all ends. Well, you know how Harry and Faith, they were having secret conversations and making out on camera, and Harry was like, don't worry, I'll delete this footage. You won't get canceled for this. That footage just airs anyways, and everyone is like, oh my god, I love this. We think Faith is so much cooler because she's hooking up with the lead judge's son. That's awesome. We want her to win even more now. But Sybil / Martha Stewart now, because Faith is so cool and awesome and everyone loves her so much, she doesn't want Faith to win the show, even though she deserves to win and everyone loves her so much, because she's worried that Faith is gonna come for her gig too much. So she gives the grand prize to Sherry, that in the end. But you know what? It doesn't even matter because Faith is actually pregnant with Harry's baby, and so they're gonna be billionaires. And that cocktail recipe she made in the first challenge with her gay friend Chaz, who we never see again, that recipe did so well on the competition website that she's actually gonna make that cocktail and sell the recipe to a major cocktail company. Can you even imagine a thing like that happening in real life? Listen, this book was terrible, but also a delight. I read this in one day. I was hooked. I wish that there had been more of these. She even made the different real housewives as characters throughout the book. There's this one character who has a very New York accent that's very clearly meant to be Jill Zarin. There's one woman named Jody Sue who's dumb as bricks, and she only got super successful because she had a rich husband who gave her jobs. And Jody Sue is very clearly meant to be a reference to Bethenny's nemesis on Rhony, Kelly Benson Boone. Kelly Benson Boone? No, I'm actually scared. Why does Kelly's name actually sound so much like Benson Boone? I am going to give this book 4 skinny margaritas out of 5 skinny margaritas. I am not giving it the full 5 out of 5 because the first part of this book did feel absolutely pointless. It really took a while to get into this, and also the weird eating disorder talk really felt unnecessary. But other than that, I loved how everybody hated and loved Faith whenever she walked into a room. I thought it was really funny. There you go. I suck at relationships, so you don't have to. 10 rules for not screwing up your happily ever after. All right, so confession, I don't actually own this book. This was one of the ones I got from the library, and I wasn't able to get a new copy in time for filming this video. But this is Bethenny's relationship advice book. As you might be able to tell from the premise and what I've told you about Bethenny's lore, Bethenny has not had the best luck with relationships in her past. She has gone through divorce twice. She has broken off several engagements. It does kind of beg the question as to why Bethenny in that scenario would feel qualified to give relationship advice to other people. Her logic is because she has had to try and fail so many times, that's how she's gotten the knowledge that someone who just got married to the first person they dated wouldn't have. And from her mistakes, you will be able to learn how to be successful at relationships. And I know what you're thinking the second you hear about a Bethenny Frankel dating advice book. What does she think about gay people? Don't worry. She has addressed the gays. Something to think about. I talk a lot about women and men, but I do not in any way want or intend to exclude same-sex couples from the discussion. Partnering with another human being is a challenge no matter your gender, and I hope that all women can get some help from my observations about women, and all men can get help from my observations about men. However, it would have been really unwieldy to keep saying he or she when referring to the reader's boyfriend/girlfriend. For that reason, also non-binary people didn't exist in 2015. For that reason, and because in my personal experience my partners have been male, I generally use he. Please forgive the exclusion of the female pronoun, and if that is what applies to you, please also, if you don't mind, put the S in front of he in your mind, so you don't feel like I'm not talking to you. That's a double negative I feel like an editor should have caught, but alas. I think that's all well and good. She's speaking from her own experience when she's talking about how she manages her relationships with men. You feel like you can resonate with that in a woman loving women relationship. All well and good. I do think that is kind of undercut by the next chapter immediately after this preface that says, understand the man. Men always want to be a woman's first love. That is their clumsy vanity. We women have a more subtle instinct about things. What we like is to be a man's last romance. Dating advice generally, whether it is written from a deeply conservative viewpoint or even a very progressive one, gets very gender normative and very gender essentialist sexist. Despite those two groups of people having purportedly very different beliefs about the roles that women should have in society and the aspirational gender dynamics between men and women, they will often spew the same talking points that essentially say that women be crazy, women are emotional, women care about things. Men, all they care about is the stock market, rocks, and balls. Intentionally or otherwise, I feel like it all normalizes this notion that men shouldn't have an inner world or care deeply about the women in their lives because that's just how men are. And vice versa, that women are these emotionally unstable creatures, so dependent on men for any form of rational thought. I just think it perpetuates really damaging ideas about gender, and I'm not a fan of that. And so I just wanted to break down some of the things Bethenny claims to be true, generally speaking, about all men on planet Earth. She says, "For much of my life, I didn't understand what men need. I thought they pretty much wanted the same things women want. Wrong. Men not only want different than we do, but they think differently. They process differently. They love differently. They are a completely different animal. Here's the truth. Men are simple, really simple. It's not that they aren't smart. Some men are extremely smart and have big intellects and high IQs and run major corporations and countries and all that. But even super smart men are simple. Your husband or boyfriend could be a rocket scientist or a nuclear physicist or the president. But despite what they do in real life, how intelligent they are, and how supposedly interested they are in the women in their lives, I have learned over the years through much study that men mainly care about a few basic things: food, drinks, usually the ones containing alcohol, guys' night out, sex, masturbation, sleep, taking a shit, power over the remote control, gadgets and technology, watching sports, playing sports, often golf, just the city of Las Vegas, scratching or rearranging their balls, the fantasy of a menage a trois, and appearing cool to other men. You want to know the things that men don't care about, according to Bethenny Frankel? Here we go. When your anniversary or any other meaningful date is, having time to just talk, your opinions about other people, the emotional thing that happened to you today, unless it directly impacts him, what any of your friends said about anything, what restaurants you were going to, or what you were going to make for dinner, unless it's something they don't like, and getting gifts from you. That last part is absolutely not true. Dan loves when I get him League of Legends skins, okay? Here's the thing. I am not trying to run defense for the ways men societally at large fall into norms that hurt women in their romantic relationships. I do think that if we normalize this sort of behavior, men just not caring about the women in their lives, about anniversaries, women's opinion about anything, if we just assume that that's a basic fact about men that we cannot change, or more importantly, expect them to work on within themselves, truly what the fuck are we doing? Bethenny takes that information and she says, you just, as a woman, need to understand that that is a fact, that they will never feel those things about you. And, you know, if you want that emotional depth, get some girlfriends, you know, don't expect men to engage in those things because they inherently just do not care. It is genuinely impressive how that line of thinking manages to be just incredibly dismissive and demeaning towards men at large, but also still manages to put the onus of men's failure in romantic relationships on women not understanding that men are terrible and we just have to accept that that's the way that they are. It also just makes me kind of sad because I feel like Bethenny would not genuinely believe these things about men if she didn't date men in her past who made her feel that way. And that like actually sucks to hear. She does actually have a licensed psychologist in this book who will sort of interject when she's saying things that just aren't true. I do kind of love that they left them in because sometimes he's really fighting Bethenny on her takes. For example, there's this one really bad paragraph. Women are complicated to the extent that we totally overcomplicate everything. Most women could benefit from a good lobotomy.
Oh, that's no. In the sense that, you know what I mean? Like,
let's just ignore the horrific history of women being persecuted through the mental health system and undergoing unnecessary medical procedures to placate the feelings of the men around them. Men are simple. They come pre-lobotomized. Lucky men. There are always exceptions, but hey, I'm just calling it like I see it. And Dr. Amador says, I wish men were as simple as Bethenny suggests. However, men are every bit as emotionally complex as women. It just doesn't seem that way to women because from early childhood, men are taught to hide our feelings, wear our armor, man up, and worse. The truth is that men want to be loved and to give love as much as women do, but to admit that in daily life is, well, it's like acting like a girl. We only have brief windows where we feel safe enough to reveal our hearts. I understand why Bethenny says things like this, as it's a way to understand the surface level of interactions. But remember not to let labels keep you from looking up, listening, and digging for deeper truths. This therapist said, don't listen to whatever Bethenny's yapping about in this chapter, alright? Please, for the love of God. And that's not the only chapter where he does that. Bethenny also talks at length about how PMS really can impact a relationship and it makes women crazy. There's another one of her books where she's like, Hillary Clinton and the feminists are really going to come at me, but maybe the reason we haven't had a female president before is because PMS makes us women crazy for a week. Bethenny, are you not the CEO of many different corporations? Have you not had a long, successful career? But also, there are real medical conditions like PMDD or endometriosis that make your periods more painful. Like, there are actual medical things that can contribute to women actually going through genuine distress around their menstrual cycle. And that is another thing that we shouldn't just accept as the norm for women. There are treatments for these things. There are ways to help, even though I will be the first to say that the medical establishment is far behind the times when it comes to research and treatment of conditions that impact women. There's this one story she tells in the book where she was PMSing, but she's going with her then boyfriend to this wedding. And her boyfriend is the usher of this wedding. So he's super busy helping things go smoothly with the wedding. And she gets upset because she feels like he's not paying enough attention to her. And she sees that he's acting nice around, the other guests at the wedding. And she gets so offended by this that she breaks up with him on the spot and actually leaves the wedding early. And she's like, and that is all because of PMS. Bethenny does qualify this story by saying she wasn't unpacking at the time, that maybe he was revealing his stress to her because she was his partner, whereas he was putting on more of a front around the other guests at the wedding. She does admit that she was in the wrong and anxious and overreacted, but I personally just fundamentally reject the notion that women and men live on these opposite planets where they have completely different irrational behavior in their own ways that cannot be changed. Gender is a spectrum. We all have masculine and feminine traits about us, and we also are all socialized in a way that can be very damaging that does separate the genders. From what I get from this book, it seems like it would actually be very helpful to people's dating life if we didn't just assume women be shopping, women be crazy, and men just don't care about anything. It feels like it's not getting us anywhere. I will say the second half of this book, where she talks more about maintaining a relationship, I actually thought was pretty helpful. She talks about how to handle things like confrontation in a healthy way, to not kitchen sink and talk about every problem under the sun that you ever had in one conversation, to wait until a time where you are calm and feel like you can actually have a discussion. She also has a chapter about control that I thought was really interesting and helpful to be in there. She talks about how money and who makes money can be a source of control in the relationship, even if it doesn't amount to abuse. That is something you need to be aware of if, for example, you're making the decision to be a stay-at-home parent and you're then reliant on this other person to maintain your livelihood. That person is going to inherently have some level of power over you, and how do you adjust that power imbalance in a relationship? And she very critically talks about red flags where it's not just about a control imbalance, an abusive relationship where it's not fixable. You shouldn't try to do various techniques to get them to listen to you. You just need to get out of that relationship. She also has a chapter towards the end of the book where she talks about relationships are great and all, but you should still maintain your own identity and your interests and your friendships outside of your relationship. That is not the most interesting thing about you. I think more than anything, this book just made me feel bad for Bethenny, because she was just describing these examples of terrible men that she's encountered. And I'm like, is this just what it's like when you're like a hot, powerful woman, that all of these men around you are garbage? And it makes me sad that her takeaway a lot of the time seemed to be just accept that men are going to be terrible in these certain ways, and that's just the fundamental way it has to be. And I'm like, no, Bethenny, I want better for you, please. Business is personal. The truth about what it takes to be successful while staying true to yourself. This is Bethenny Frankel's most recent book. Bethenny Frankel has given some version of business advice in just about every book I've read from her, except for maybe the cookie peanut one. But then again, there's probably a page in there that I'm forgetting about. Bethenny is undeniably, I think, one of the the most prolific businesswomen to come out of the Real Housewives. In doing so, she really had that capitalist Barbie drive because she did things that were not, at least according to her, the super norm for the time of Real Housewives. Prior to Bethenny coming on the show, Bravo was entitled to any business a Real Housewife would start after their time on the show, or presumably any memoir they tried to release. Bravo would get a cut of that because Bravo was presumably adding some notoriety to their name by them appearing on the show. Bethenny was very adamant in her initial contract negotiations with the Real Housewives that she wanted to have full ownership of anything she produced separate from the show. She actually says that one of her biggest business regrets was that she didn't also demand a cut of the Real Housewives franchise in her negotiations, which, probably wouldn't have happened, but I can imagine it keeps her up at night. Also, when she sold the Skinnygirl liquor brand, she kept the rights to the Skinnygirl name. She was able to make many other Skinnygirl lines outside of liquor, some of which are still around today, like the waist trainers, I think are pretty big. She has some Skinnygirl salad dressing I think you can still get at Walmart. Other things, however, like the Skinnygirl snack packs, the Skinnygirl deli meat, those have sort of been long forgotten, and there has been many a Skinnygirl Bethenny Frankel business venture that has come up and does not exist to this day. You know what? That happens in business. If I had the money and honestly the drive to execute all of the Shark Tank business pitches I come up with in my head at any given point, I would do it. And most of them would probably massively fail. Bethenny gets a lot of questions about how she is so successful in business and how other people can do it too. Here's my thing. Once again, my hatred of self-help books. This time, business edition. Every business self-help or how-to guide I've ever come across basically comes down to the same basic 5 principles that you've heard everywhere your entire life for free. A problem that you think you can solve with an idea. How would you execute that? How would you market that? Think about that. They're not going to answer that question of how you would execute or market that for you, but they're just going to put the thought in your head. Every business book is going to have the same basic, vague, generally motivating ideas in there. And I think at best, a self-help book of any variety, reading books like that will give you an often temporary, but still an actual sense of motivation that might make you more inclined to actually do projects that you didn't otherwise before reading that book. But the thing is, because this business advice has to have 1, mass appeal, and 2, business people aren't actually going to give you their real, true secrets to success that other people can replicate because they have their own shtick to maintain. The tangible and actually difficult aspects of running a business, none of these books are really going to have that answer for you. Going into a Bethenny Frankel business self-help book, I was already skeptical to begin with. It's interesting, there's actually a lot more tangible business advice in her other books. Like I remember in A Place of Yes, she offers this one piece of insightful advice where she's like, if you're interested in making toys, why not talk to your friend who happens to own a luxury toy store? Because he probably has connections of how to make toys. Bethenny, why hadn't I thought of that? Business is Personal feels much less like a how-to guide versus more so random anecdotes from Bethenny and how she invented TikTok and podcasting, business generally, and how she has trademarked everything and who runs the world, girls. There are actually several anecdotes in this book where she complains about how no one wants to work anymore. Specifically, none of her personal assistants are doing the dang job that she wants them to do. She says some of the assistants I've hired didn't want to work on the weekends, or if they did, they wanted to know about overtime pay. They hadn't wanted to work past 5 or 6 o'clock. They didn't want to do any of the heavy lifting in terms of effort. People today often don't seem to have the same hunger to be the best pencil sharpener. We need to get that ambition back. In a world where everybody receives a medal for showing up or complains about the fact that their identity holds them back, you can be a standout by showing up and working harder and smarter than everyone else. Stop asking Bethenny if she's going to pay you for the extra labor she's asking you to do. Just do it and don't complain, and she will speak positively about you in her next self-help book. One day, Bethenny has the idea to recreate Don't Cry For Me Argentina from the musical Evita and post it on TikTok, which is beautifully poetic and ironic in itself. She specifically talks about how she felt like she didn't need to hire social media managers and assistants to do the job for her because she already knew how to do everything so well. And the point of the story is just do it yourself, because if you're someone like Bethenny Frankel, you just know how to do it and no one's going to do the job better than you. She says, it wasn't something that would move the needle on my business, but if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it well. I trusted that my new social media person would do everything necessary to ensure a successful video. But unfortunately, the social media assistant she hired, against her better judgment, doesn't properly sync Bethenny's lips with the audio of Evita, and so Bethenny has to go in herself. Any video editor will know that is probably one of the most difficult things you can ask a person to do in Final Cut Pro. In another chapter, she talks about how in order to be successful at business, you need to be able to look at the big picture. And the way Bethenny in her past has looked at the big picture is that in the pandemic, when everyone was, losing their jobs, they didn't know how they were going to make rent, they could no longer afford to live in New York City, Bethenny noticed that, hey, a lot of people are probably going to want to move to more affordable housing outside of the city. Bethenny Frankel had the genius idea to buy, renovate, and flip multiple single-family homes in Connecticut so that she could make a profit off of the most distressing event in many people's lives. She also mentions that this is not actually the first time that she did it. Actually, 2 days before the 2016 Trump election, Bethenny found an apartment in Manhattan that seemed to be grossly underpriced given its size. During the run-up to that election, I saw how emotional and passionate people had become about the candidates. I can't imagine why. Many people in New York, and I'm sure in many other places, were unsure of what would happen if Donald Trump was elected. The real estate market was in temporary paralysis, which to me meant it was a good time to buy. When everyone is stopped, you should be moving. See, when everybody is scared of the fascist takeover of our country, the downfall of democracy, you should be buying and reselling real estate to struggling families. At least the properties Bethenny is describing that she bought, they do sound like they're in the upper range of homes. They're not like in low-income neighborhoods or anything from the sounds of it, but y'all... Why does every self-help business book just take 300 pages to tell you the real way to make money is to take advantage of other people's suffering and become a landlord? Is there no other way? I guess not. Maybe there really isn't. This is going to sound so backhanded. I'm sorry in advance, but I do genuinely think that's something that makes Bethenny, so prolific as a Real Housewife today, even though she left the show several years ago. There is a certain shamelessness to Bethenny that I do think gets her further than other people who would think twice before doing some of the things that she does. She famously, on Real Housewives of New York, drives around in a car that is shrink wrapped with her brand Skinnygirl on the side, and her soon-to-be nemesis on the show, Luann, makes a comment about that, to which Bethenny says,
I can wear an Hermes belt, I can wear a Skinnygirl card, you know what I mean? They're not paying me for the Hermes belt.
Exactly, you dumb drag queen. They're not paying you, that's the point.
Say what you will about Bethenny Frankel, if there's one thing I've gotten from these books is that Bethenny is not afraid to go for it and say whatever she's feeling, no matter how it may come across. And I have to respect that to some extent. Also, in this book, she does some retconning and defense for her Skinnygirl brand, which, as you can imagine, that name, quintessential 2000s, right? I remember Skinny Cow ice cream being all the rage, lean cuisine being everywhere. The 2000s was skinny obsessed, and so Bethenny's brand name was bound to take off. I mean, I bought the Skinnygirl margarita having no idea it was attached to a Real Housewife just because that name is so reminiscent of the diet culture I grew up in. Of course, that was going to sell well. But of course, as times have changed, our attitudes around weight have sort of changed. She sort of runs some defense for her name Skinnygirl and says that just because she named her brand Skinnygirl and her original logo was a ridiculously thin woman with a tape measure drawn around her waist and her holding an apple, that doesn't mean that you have to actually be thin to be a skinny girl. Skinny girl can be any size. You can be any size and buy products from Bethenny Frankel. She does believe that inside of you is a naturally thin person, according to her book, but let's not talk about that. So she talks about her decision to sell skinny jeans under the name Skinnygirl. She says, it had to be inclusive. My brand partners and I were careful to explain that Skinnygirl jeans help you unleash all of your inner skinny girl. The jeans represent a state of mind that's not about being thin. We had to overstate that idea and reinforce it in the way we sold, marketed, or advertised the jeans. It's not about being a specific size or weight. The same is true of the other products under the Skinnygirl name. Everything under the brand reinforces that idea. Listen, even I am not chronically online enough to cancel Bethenny Frankel for using the word skinny. As a skinny girl myself, being so petite and small and with like my little thin frame, I understand how it is to move through the world and just kind of be that bitch. And I'm sick of apologizing for it. And I don't expect Bethenny Frankel to do that either. I do just think that her message about skinny girl being for everyone is undercut by her own language in her book Naturally Thin, where she explicitly says that within every fat person is a naturally thin person waiting to come out. And in fact, in Naturally Thin, she talks about how people need to give yourself permission to be naturally thin. I mean, that's the real reason why everyone isn't a size 0. Have you asked yourself permission to be the size of a Barbie doll? Yes, for some people, being overweight really does have some seeming benefits. As I mentioned before, safety, protection, and a great excuse. An excuse for what? For not being in a good relationship? For not having a great job? For not putting on a bikini and risking uncomfortable exposure? For being able to blame your parents for your life since you inherited their weight problems and it's all their fault? That's crap. You don't have to wear a bikini. Plenty of naturally thin people don't. And frankly, the extra layer of fat is not protecting you in any real or useful way. Bethenny co-wrote Naturally Thin in 2009, so I don't want to say for certain that this is what she still believes. I feel like you could pull up a YouTube video from a year ago that I said something embarrassingly wrong that I don't stand behind, and I don't think she has to go line by line with all of her published work and retract and refute every single thing. I do, however, think it's convenient that her defense of the Skinny Girl name, that it is for everybody, not just for skinny girls, just so happens to also broaden her market so that people can buy more products from her. That is in itself, I guess, smart marketing, but she's not explicit about that within her book about business, which I find very interesting. That was a strange read, I'm gonna say. That was probably one of my least favorites of hers, which was unfortunate that that was like the note we ended on. I'm gonna give that 2 Skinny Girl margaritas out of 5. I don't really know what I expected to gain from this. I really hope I didn't come off like too much of a hater in this. At the end of the day, Bethenny Frankel is an accomplished woman who wrote 9 books. Many of them were on the New York Times bestselling list, and I'm just truly some person in my living room. Like, what do I know? I hope y'all found this interesting. If you didn't, that's fine. I will literally never do it again. We can forget that this happened. If you liked this video, if you want to see more from me, I upload bonus videos once a month on my Patreon if you want to support me over there. I also stream on Twitch every once in a while and upload the VODs of that on my second gaming channel. And if you aren't interested in any of that, that's fine. That's cool. However, if you liked this video, you could feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye.